welcome to those that have just joined us. My name is Chelsea Joy and I am your host for today. Next up, we have a panel discussion on the seed conundrum. Where does the current law leave South Africa with regards to seeds? And with us on stage, we have Hannah Shades from 365 Vertical, Chief Compliance Officer. We have Andrew Laurie from Schindler's Attorneys, and he's an associate. And then we have Julian Stubbs from Fields of Green for All, and he is the Director of Social Activism. We're going to kick off our panel discussion with 20 minutes, and then we will have another 20 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have any questions for our speakers, make a note of them, and then we'll pass the mic around and we'll have them answered as best as possible. There will also be some time afterwards for you to chat to our speakers in the delegate lounge just next door. So be sure to stick around afterwards. Over to you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Well, since this panel discussion is supposed to be around the current laws, I may as well start by informing you as to what they actually are. The only significant change to our cannabis law has really come in during the September 2018 judgment. And how that judgment achieved the present freedoms that we enjoy to use and cultivate cannabis for private use, it amended certain laws. So when one understands how these laws were amended, a certain intention starts to reveal itself. So when it comes to the cultivation of cannabis, the natural reason for us acquiring seeds, they have changed the definition of deal in the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act. The Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act defines deal in to be a number of activities. It reads any activity in connection with, and it goes on, the transshipment, the importation, blah, 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 cultivation of cannabis is listed in the definition of deal in. Now, post the judgment, that definition of deal in when it comes to cultivation has been changed to exclude any activity in connection with the cultivation of cannabis. Now, the confusion comes in when you look at how cannabis is defined in our law. Cannabis is presently defined as cannabis, the whole plant, or any part thereof. Now that definition is wide enough to incorporate seeds. It can be easily considered to be a part of cannabis. So how cannabis is presently being enforced, and I know a number of online seed distributors had a run-in with the Hawks for this exact reason, is our law enforcement sees these seeds as being Schedule 7 substances, being part of cannabis per the definitions. Now naturally we know that seeds are not psychoactive, they're benign, and yet now we still have the classification as being that of Schedule 7, the same as methamphetamine. So what we have here is enforcement doing things one way, and then we have a constitutional court judgment which has clearly been intended to allow us to grow and use cannabis. So when one looks at the judgment purposively, and that's how one must look at all judgments, is how did it intend to achieve the ends of the order that it granted. It is now said that any action in connection with the cultivation of cannabis is not to be considered dealing in for purposes of the Drugs Act. How does one cultivate cannabis? Where are we expected to get the seeds? Now we know for sure that free gifting of the seeds is allowed. Without that most basic way of acquiring seeds, our new rights mean nothing. How are we supposed to cultivate this weed? It's not the case that we all had it before the judgment. How do we get it? So we're confident at least that our current law allows us to gift it. But I mean, when there's no quid pro quo, when you're not earning anything, where's the incentive? Where do we get it from? So we believe that there's a constitutional argument to be made based on our present laws to say that the selling of seeds is benign, and any regulation or limitation of the sale of seeds is arbitrary. It stands to be struck out. Unfortunately, we haven't had the chance to present this to court yet. People have been treading very lightly and have rather been turning down on seed distributing activities when they have to answer to themselves. But we believe there's definitely an argument there. We believe that constitutional courts cannot have intended to give us the freedoms we have without any means of ultimately realizing and taking advantage of those freedoms. So that's where we are now. The law says one thing, law enforcement does another. It's a bit of a precarious position to be in, but we're confident that should anyone have to answer to courts, there is a legal argument to be made. It's not cut and dry, and it is certainly one of the grey areas that you hear people talking about. I don't know if...
Thank you for that, Andrew. That was a really good start. Explaining, that was about 3,000 rands worth of legal advice that says it's still a grey area. At Fields of Green for All, the only way we deal in seeds is when people fall foul of the police more than anybody. Because it's as if the police are playing a game with us. It's like a power play, because remember in this constitutional judgment, they were given sweeping powers. In, I think it was paragraph 93, they become judge and jury. I live in Johannesburg, and the sorting office in Johannesburg, we have never had a phone call from anybody that's brought any seeds in as gifts or heirlooms from overseas, brought online. But in Cape Town, in Goodwood, it is a completely different scenario. Every week, we have somebody who's now really nervous. They want to know that they've had a phone call saying, your package is ready at customs. And now, because of the grey area, and because there has been money involved because they bought the seeds overseas, they're not sure if they have the courage to go and face the music, because it's actually the police looking to see what's in it for them. And most of the time we find that people don't go to collect their seeds, and we can only imagine that those 500 rand pips are now in the hands of the wrong people, and they'll just sell them on. I know it sounds brutal, but I deal with prohibition every day of the week, and I haven't met a cop that I like yet in South Africa. We have a very, very low opinion of them because it's the police that are holding us back in all of this. They should turn a blind eye to seeds, because as Andrew says, they're very, very benign things. So at Fields of Green for All, we deal with the prohibition itself, not so much the plant itself, and we can tell you that there is an issue, and as Andrew says, it has to be proven in law. And the judgment is full of these grey areas where people have to step up to the plate and say, it is my constitutional right to own these seeds and buy them online. We're waiting for that brave person to come up to us and say, I want to take this on.
Well, yeah, sorry. It does speak to a wider issue regarding a lack of certainty in our law, and while it depends what side of the fence you sit really when it comes to legal uncertainty. The problem with it is that one cop can arrest you for something while another cop might let it slide. Because of that grey area, enforcement can pretty much make the law mean what they want it to mean, depending on the circumstances, depending on the facts, depending on the evidence. What we need in cannabis legislation, especially around seeds, is absolute certainty. Certainty in the sense that there need to be written words that say you may sell seeds subject to X and Y requirements if they see fit to give us requirements. But right now, with sort of the concept of the police having the final say as to what is and is not too much, these are the very same people who arrested, trained to arrest us for even small amounts. So right now where the power lies, it's not a tenable position, and the reason it's possible is because there is a lack of certainty, and we hope to see these lacks of certainty addressed in September 2020, being the date until which Parliament has to effect new regulations post the Constitutional Court judgment. So the issue with uncertainty is that you get mixed results.
Yes.
Yeah.
There we are.
So how did you do in Colorado? You guys are home and dry, you're on the home straight, right?
Sure. You can say that. We've got about 350 pages of regulations on the recreational side, 350 pages on the medical side. As much as you think they link up, they do not. Even the definitions vary from side to side. And I think what's important to take away is, as we talk about the need to create an absolute permissibility to trade in seeds, you must be cautious to not then arbitrarily create the regulations having to do with those seeds. Because we were discussing before this panel between us, the danger of dealing with this seed that represents a whole plant. You have farmers that deal in industrial hemp, but if you know anything about the genetics of the planting as you go forward, the potency of a particular element in that seed of origin may become more potent. So you have, even in the States, industrial hemp farmers losing crops because they've tested now at 0.04, the legal limit in the States being 0.03 and below is industrial hemp. So that seed is a very important aspect of this trade, but the arbitrary regulation of it can be very dangerous economically across the board. So as regulators are working best collaborate
It's going on and off a little bit. So in Colorado, you can walk into a head shop and buy seed, and people can plant those seeds.
Absolutely.
All right, so now on the west coast that I visited in August, in California and Washington State, it's impossible to buy a seed. They're just not allowed. They are still illegal to buy.
Can't buy seeds, you can buy immature plants in those markets.
And that is a control mechanism, so it's mostly a clone environment, yeah? But I can relate a story from Wednesday. I went to Bergville to speak to the government, to the agricultural department at KZN, and we were blown away by the fact that there were 350 farmers in the room, and I had a Zulu translator, and everybody wanted to know where to get seed. But they're talking about seed to grow halfway up the Drakensberg Mountains, fields of green for all. And I said, well, why don't you make the seed? Because all you got to do is put some seed in the ground and do not filter them out. Keep the males and the females together, and if you get clever at it, every single female seed plant will bear 7,000 seed. And everybody looked at me and they thought, now they know what they're going to do for the next year or two. So we don't actually need seed from anywhere overseas, because I think any seed that comes in commercially into South Africa for an industrial purpose is going to wreck the South African bio for all of the seed we've got here. So everybody wants to come and grow hemp because it's legal. You know, it doesn't get you high, and it's like the right thing to do. But it's never grown in this part of the world since time began. And they're trying to manipulate nature just to stay within the bounds of what Hannah said, the 0.3%. And I've read an article in the last week where 10 million plants, 10 million, have been burnt in California. Not made into biofuel, not turned into electricity or shoes or socks or anything. They just burned it because it's illegal, because it crept to 0.5. So that's going to happen with any imported seed in Africa within 6 months.
And it's madness, truly, because California has a legal market, so they weren't able to then transfer that hemp product into the regulated marijuana space. They had to destroy it. You can imagine the absurdity. There's no mechanism for those folks to cooperate, even though it's the same plant that they're working with. And one next door to the other is allowed to sell that product then, or make it into a balm or something with the CBD concentrates. It's madness.
But just, with respect again to the legal absurdity of not being able to sell seeds, what Jules described is perfectly legal. If you do have your own cannabis plants and they do produce seeds and you keep those and use those to grow, according to the strict interpretation of the law, that's perfectly permissible. So if you think about a law and what a law seeks to achieve, the law must have a rational basis. It must be linked to a rational outcome. We say murder is illegal because rationally we don't want people to just be able to kill you over a disagreement. The same now applies with laws prohibiting the sale of seeds. What is the rational purpose to what it's linked? So from a high level, what you've just described, if you grow your own seeds and use your own seeds, it's perfectly fine. But if you sell them, it's not. How can there be a rational prohibition of the sale of seeds when the evil it's supposed to be guarding against is the use of seeds, and the use of seeds is fine? So again, we're left with a completely irrational basis for law enforcement to try and stop the sale of seeds in any measure. And that's the argument which has not been brought before it, the one that we feel they need to hear.
But the other thing is, in America, an African seed is worth much more than the weed. If you've got pips in California that are from a real live land-raised Swazi gold from a 3-hour walk into the mountains, you'll get $30 per seed. And you're not going to get that for the cannabis. So there is a massive market in seed in South Africa already. They're here. There's lots of people in South Africa that have done the difficult job of importing it. However, in a suitcase or through customs or whichever way they did it. Can I ask you a question about is there a difference in law between a hemp seed and a cannabis seed?
Presently, no. Presently, there's no difference between cannabis or hemp in the eyes of the law.
Only in the germinated plant?
Not even so. There's no, if I again refer back to the all-encompassing definition of cannabis, which says cannabis, the whole plant's or any part thereof. There's no provision there which says, provided a cannabis plant has X and Y amount of CBD or THC, the defining characteristics of hemp. There's no exception to that definition presently.
And you guys have just passed the hemp law in 2018. So now hemp is like
federally legal, yes.
Right,
So
so-
marijuana is legal in several states, but we just finally federally legalized industrial hemp.
And now there's just more and more drift.
Absolutely.
And farmers who have been farming corn or maize, whatever, and sunflowers forever are now getting into the hemp business, and it's not working out properly because it's tricky, huh?
Yes.
It's tricky stuff. It's not like throwing it in the ground and waiting for the millions to come in. There's a lot of learning curves, but I'm really on a mission now to try and stop any imports of any low THC genetics because it's trying to mess things up. In the Fields of Green for All office at the moment, we have a banner that says, "Keep the homelands hemp free." Let's just cut to the chase and grow weed because it grows 4 meters high twice a year. And if you don't like THC, we've got enough equipment out here to extract the THC, and you can throw it in the sea or in the Uzungugu River or anywhere. Put it in the dam, burn it if you don't like the THC.
Absolutely, but I think that too misses the point, right? And the point is that we're talking about cannabis as medicine, and the THC has its own implications for conditions that it may treat. Denver just decriminalized magic mushrooms, so we're looking at the possibility of psychedelics across the spectrum, treating a variety of disorders. So what do we want to regulate and why? And if we're looking at this whole plant as a medicine, why aren't we looking at the whole plant?
But the way I look at it all, the big picture of Fields of Green for All is we're trying to legalize this plant to make the world a better place, not to make it harder to get into the industry and to block the seeds or get customs. Everything's like a barrier to entry. And we're trying to do this literally to move forward as a human race in the 21st century. And the government has to come to the party. And in America, they're not really. They're making it really tough. After how many years in Colorado? 3-4 years now. You still can't bank. There's no banking still, yeah?
9 years, yeah, so medical in 2010.
So they're still not allowed to put the money in the bank because at a federal level, the banks can't handle the money from dodgy weed.
But they still have to pay their federal taxes, cash. You can imagine.
So I came away from America knowing not what to do. It was a great experience to find out what not to do, and that's what we're not going to do. And thankfully, we've got people like this to keep us on the straight and narrow about the seeds. It's a very tricky situation. People are scared of bringing the seed in, but there are seed sellers and there are affiliate companies of Fields of Green for All that are actually have an advert on the Fields of Green for All site, and they are doing business in South Africa. And we just wait for the day when it becomes very hectic and the hawks rock up and there's like 100 seeds and now somebody gets charged for something. We wait for the day and we will guide them through the process because we have to find a precedent in a court of law to sort it out once and for all. That's the only way that the law changes. Someone has to fight it.
Yeah, I mean, so again, looking at what the intention of the Constitutional Court must have been when they gave us the freedoms to cultivate and use cannabis in the private space. It could not have been in their mind at the time that when they gave us these freedoms, you would have to commit a crime somewhere in the value chain. A crime of purchasing a seed, a crime of growing the cannabis. It cannot be that they would have had in their head that in order to use and take advantage of these rights, you must have committed a crime. That's not something that the court could ever say or anyone could ever be reasonably expected to read into that judgment. Yeah.
How are we doing? Has anybody got some questions going on?
Okay, let's start the Q&A.
Everybody wants seed, yeah? Everybody came looking for seed. You need like, I think the most expensive seed I've seen at the moment is about $1,500. But if you look at it, it will grow an 80,000 rand plant. So that's where we are with cannabis.
During a month, you cannot sell it.
You can't, of course you can't sell it, you can gift it, of course. But after spending 5 months loving it and nurturing it, do you really want to give it away?
Yes.
Well, we looked into the act of dealing, the word dealing itself, and these guys have got massive leather-bound books. They love leather-bound books, and they open up all the books to find out what dealing is. And it's actually, the person who is receiving is not the dealer. They can kind of get off the legal argument. It's the person that is offering you it, not the money, it. The seed's going to you and you're buying the seeds. You're not the criminal. They are the criminal for offering you seed in the first place. That is literally the dealing aspect of it. But that argument would take you about 50,000 rand, and 3 years waiting for a High Court judge to figure it out.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think we should open the floor to questions. I think even personally that there's so much about the law that I don't even probably understand. It all seems very confusing to me and how it's allowed and also not allowed and So I think if any of you have questions with regards to the law and seeds and even marijuana in general, perhaps cannabis, CBD, THC. So the floor is open. Do you want to just raise your hand if you have something to ask? Okay, we've got one over there, and then we'll get to you, and then we'll get to you. Perfect.
Hi guys, I just want to ask with regards to, say you growing the seed, you have the seed and somebody buys it at the time, say now for example, I think this company is really going to do it and grow for you and so on. What about the middleman that actually transports that seed? What about him? Is he considered facilitator or the dealer? So he's growing, I buy from him, and he gives it to a courier company.
Yes.
The courier company doesn't know what they're offering, but say they find out, what's the implication on that person, that entity?
Okay, so you have to look at what the definition of deal in is, and I touched on it earlier. The word deal in, for purposes of the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, actually has a definition. So we have our own interpretation of what deal in means, but if you actually look at the act, it sets out which activities constitute dealing. And within that list of activities is the word transshipment. So one who would be delivering the weed or seeds would be transshipping it and would therefore be seen to be dealing in. Again, that's a legal absurdity. So if you look in the definition of deal in, there's also cultivation. So cultivation now reads differently after the judgment, saying that any act in connection with cultivation of cannabis is fine. But that doesn't extend to transshipment. So again, if you were to purchase your own seed, grow your own seeds and give them to someone, we say that's fine. Now, again, by way of a legal absurdity, if you gave it to someone to give to someone else, that would be transshipment and it would be dealing in for the purposes of the Drugs Act. So for now, if you want to stay squeaky clean, just keep the value chain within your own growing and distribution of the seeds. As soon as you get more and more people involved, it gets more and more grey and the risk increases as to what kind of definition might get you in trouble.
What I can tell you on a practical note from being in the underground at Fields of Green for All is, if you are using courier companies, do not use Postnet and do not use Aramax because they were compromised a couple of years ago. Both those companies use dogs to sniff stuff out, but they're not looking to bust anybody for anything. They destroy it, and they don't go to the police. They don't turn it into a felony. They just don't want to have an illegal substance within their loop. Aramax, Postnet, stay away from them. Courier guy rocks. They're the only country, they're the only courier in the country that does not ask what is in the box.
Okay, so in terms of seeds coming in, right? Obviously, different genetics, mainly with our language.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there anything in place currently to stop people from taking our genetics, reverse them themselves, and so it's kind of like the file system? Anything that we can have done?
That's a very good question. No, there is nothing. That's just called smuggling. That's been going on since time began. And it's becoming, for me personally, it's becoming more and more critical because there's some really special stuff in Africa. We have got some incredible genetics that are absolutely world renowned. And they've got incredible medicine properties. They've got really, really amazing profiles of cannabinoids. And now, there are people straight hunting away the 5,000 seeds here out of the country, take it to wherever, grow them out, and sell that intellectual property right, basically. That's what it is. It's against the Nagoya Protocol, but smugglers are smugglers. I've never had that question before. It's a great question. What about that? That is completely against the law, perhaps?
Well, you can't acquire intellectual property rights in a commodity that isn't tradable yet. You can't. The point is, it's still a prohibited Schedule 7 substance. On a strict interpretation of the definition of cannabis, you can't acquire intellectual property rights in a technique of assaulting someone, for example.
That's,
yeah.
you don't have that problem. Well, cross-border transshipment.
It's still legal, certainly.
So, do you see somebody just sign some sort of hemp bill so they could transport hemp across the state? It's like this big thing. We're going to transport hemp. We're going to have to get an official document for it. It's like transporting plutonium.
It's madness. Well, now what you're seeing with the states all working separately is that you have states like Oregon and California doing regional agreements because they have so much product moving illegally. They're then crafting legislation to permit that. But really, it's moving all over. So now the benefit of that for the regulators is, of course, that it gives them eyes on for taxation purposes. So if you really get to the bottom of the purpose of regulation, it's for the taxation. If you can just get to that and ensure them that they'll get their money, perhaps we can get ahead of some of this.
Right. And going on to your question again, to the transshipment of, surely if you've got a bunch of seeds in your vehicle, you're not driving along and the cops stop you, isn't your vehicle a private space?
So it involves the cops doing an inquiry as to whether or not you had an intention to transship those seeds to someone else. If they were your own seeds and you were driving around with them, that would be fine. But if they can establish an intention that you're delivering seeds that didn't belong to someone else, a very difficult thing to prove, then yeah, sure, there may be a ground there.
That's really silly.
Yes.
It's really silly. It's silly.
I know, saying it out loud is difficult.
It's really silly.
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer your question? It's all very grey. An analogy that we have at Fields of Green is, when we got this judgment, we know the boundary of the judgment. There's a box around this. We know there's a box of what we can't do. Yeah? But inside that box, they took a whiteboard marker and they scrubbed the whole of the inside out. So it's just this blank box. And in it is your seed transshipments and importing seeds and giving seeds and trading. And that's what it is. We've got this completely blank box to deal with.
I think that's fair to say.
Next question.
Do you guys think SAHPRA and the government are a little bit confused between medicinal cannabis and the medicinal market and the rec market, and especially on the seed side? With regards to you can grow at home, but they also understand that on a license side you have to have registered genetics if you're growing the license. But on a rec side it doesn't have to be as easily registered in some borders, but it does be licensed for the license market.
Sure. Well, SAHPRA are falling over themselves to register and license and put blocks in the way to control the whole thing. For my money, the reason the cops are going berserk at the moment is that SAHPRA told them to. They've been given carte blanche to clean up the streets before SAHPRA come out with something. I don't really do. Maybe you can. You got an answer for that, because they do think there's two things. My weed is bad because it hasn't got a barcode, and I just smoke weed. I'm just a weed smoker. I'm not a medical anything. So they do think in their heads that there's two separate things. Do you? No. Good.
Yeah, SAHPRA's mandate is only to focus on medical cannabis. To the extent that they try and, I don't know, have anything to do with the recreational market, that goes beyond their mandate. They're supposed to only be regulating medical cannabis. But I think where the confusion comes in, the overlap, is that Section 22C license is the only license in South Africa which presently allows you to commercialize cannabis in any way. A lot of people want to commercialize it for different reasons. There are those who want to be involved and active in the medical market, then there are those who want to be active in the recreational market. And they have a misconception that if they try and get this medical license, they can sell to people recreationally within South Africa. That's not the case. And because of a misunderstanding of the law, SAHPRA will often deal with that. And they will tell people, no, we cannot we can't approve your application for whatever reason. And those people came in with the intention of being active in the recreational space. It's simply not what SAHPRA has to do, but they've had their say on the recreational space because, essentially because license applications that should have never been there in the first place have come their way. And their mandate ends and finishes with medical cannabis and not with recreational cannabis.
And it's interesting because they're looking at treating your seed just like you would treat a pharmaceutical drug. So genetic markers, I talked to this a little bit earlier, and the danger in that, so it says in the SAHPRA that you have to have a particular strain that you can trace, and that it has to be indicated for a particular condition. But as you cultivate, things change, and especially when you're doing genetics taking cuttings and manipulating them. You'll find, I think the last licensee I visited in California that was doing it, they said that by their third generation, they had to wipe and start anew from seed because the strain gets polluted so quickly. So it's really incumbent upon them to be less ridiculous in regulating the seeds, particularly in the medical market, but also in the recreational space, so that you can start to do the research to determine which strains and genetics from the seed in its pure form do what for folks.
Sorry, is there any other question, right? Just going back to the drift thing a minute, 5 years ago I was in Swaziland and a whole bunch of European genetics came into one particular valley and they were donated to the farmers so they could basically grow a much better crop and receive more money for it. And they were looking, instead of 3,000 rand a kilo for bushweed, they would maybe get 10,000 rand on the kilo for these New York, it was actually sour diesel genetic from Europe. So the whole valley was planted and they had a harvest. And then and of course the land races are all on that side and they're all on this side, so the drift happened. And the next year, those plants are called the cross. So now they're going to get 6,000 or 7,000 rand a kilo for the cross. And the point I'm making is, it took 2.5 years, 5 harvests, for all of the diesel to disappear out of the valley, and the land race came back loud and proud in the end. So the land race is here to stay, and it's omnipotent. It will beat anything in its own game. But more and more genetics are coming into the country purely because there's more bang for their buck. People want to buy THC, and they're prepared to pay top draw for lots of THC. So that's where it's going.
On what you're talking about, then I mean, is there a body that's going to certify these different strains and so on? Because what's going to happen is, what's going to stop John Block to say this is X strain because he knows that this one is higher yield and so on? And there's going to be proliferation all over the market of all these strains, and the market is going to be confused. And eventually this thing is going to impact the price, and it's going to lead to a lot of clones, etc., etc. Is there a body looking into these things before even the clarity of licenses? Because what I've heard about licenses is that even the current companies that have been given licenses, there's some investigation, and I don't know what that results into. I mean, if there's been only 5 companies given licenses to date, and you've got lots of interest all over for licensing and so on, the whole thing is a mess. And I want the lawyer to comment on this, because there's going to be a flooding of applications, and I don't know what body is supposed to be competent enough to deal with this. And you know what's going to happen. People who've got finances to support this thing are going to just get disillusioned, and the whole industry is going to take a while for it to pick up.
So what I can tell you right now, there's no such body attending to that duty that you've described of, say, cataloging and registering and keeping track of information on seeds. No one's doing that currently. So the question is, do we need a new system and do we need a new body to actually do that? Or can our law accommodate it already? So a lot of the problems we've been seeing with cannabis are because cannabis is now being forced into a legal system that was enacted while cannabis was illegal. We're trying to take a very unique plant with many applications and fit it into certain boxes. So can the law cater for something like that already? I would say that in the field of intellectual property rights, it wouldn't be a leap of logic for the relevant authority, I think it would be the Department of Health, to issue a notice saying that seeds may be subject to intellectual property rights. That would be one way of managing it. And then we already have a system. We already have a system for that. It gives you pretty good protection depending on what the product is, both internationally and nationally. So there is a system that could cater for that. There's no one doing it presently, but because of just how many applications cannabis has, and because of all the problems we see trying to force it into other legal paradigms, regulating it with acts that were enacted while it was illegal, I think the best option would be to entrust that duty over to a new body with new regulations that cater specifically for it. So the answer to your question is no, no one's doing it. And yeah, it's just a matter of whether or not it's going to be filtered through our intellectual property system, or whether or not government's going to see fit to create a new ministry or a new body to oversee it. We simply don't know.
How did you do it in your part of the world? People are now farming on a large scale with hemp. What seeds are the seed? What nationality are they? They're from the States?
No. The traceability there is very gray.
It's still, really?
Still,
Okay.
oh yeah. Well, so in every market that's come up in the States, there's a period during which it says you have such and such time to enter your beginning inventory into our tracking system or your tracking system. And during that time, they literally turn the other cheek, and whatever you say you have is what you have. Bob's favorite strain from his basement is in your beginning inventory. Afghani Kush in your beginning inventory. And there's no testing of the genetics at that time. So only the market and that the consumers would know because they've been smoking it and it's been their favorite for a period of time and they would revolt if you tried to lie to them. Only the market would control that.
There's another way I look at it. This problem you describe with the schmangle of it all, I think in the end, the cannabis plant is laughing at all of us and it has an ulterior motive just to mess with our heads. There's no way of controlling it. And this whole thing about indicas or sativas, it doesn't exist. It's so complex on the inside of the plant that your sour diesel is his purple kush. It's the same plant, but there's so many different names for so few cannabis profiles. So as a romantic thought, just being an old stoner, I think the cannabis plant will have the last laugh and it will do what it pleases in the end, regardless of what we want it to do.
Do we have any more questions?
I don't know whether it's true that companies that have applied, approved, there's a question mark, and then this whole thing is being reviewed. Now, my lawyer must help in terms of what's happening. That review is going to take place, and what's the chances of other people? Is there going to be a new regime put in terms of criteria? Why is it happening?
I must be honest, I'm going to need some more help with that question. Are you asking particularly what the regime is around licenses and permits being granted? Is that the question? So the present regime, again, the problem with it is that it's been around for a long time. It was created a long time before cannabis was legalized. We apply a medical license to cannabis, the very same one that we would use to say produce Ritalin or any other kind of medicine. So we take that framework that you need to apply to get drugs like that on the market and we superimpose it onto the cannabis regime. And now simple act of growing cannabis becomes a medical undertaking and it's subject to the same time delays that registering a medicine, say Concerta or Ritalin or something like that. It's subject to those same delays. But the problem is the current system is incompatible with the system that we need for cannabis. For cannabis, there are so many different strains, so many different applications, that each one of those strains, each one of those applications, if they made medical claims, would have to be registered as their own medicine. Now, registration of a medicine in South Africa takes a long time. It takes between 2 to 4 years. If you take a pill like Concerta, it has a very defined object that it has to meet. You only have to get it registered once, and then you can just keep selling it. Cannabis treats more than one thing. Concerta, for example, I keep going back to that because it's a widely known example. It treats concentration issues. Cannabis treats a whole array of issues now. Now, what the current legislation says is that if you synthesize a medicine based on cannabis for one particular ailment, it must be registered as a medicine that only does that. And that must happen every single time we create a new medicine based on cannabis for a new disease. We don't have the time. It would take hundreds of years to register cannabis in each permutation that we needed to be registered in. So again, this is an unfortunate consequence of superimposing old laws on a new regime. So again, ideally we'd like to see new legislation passed to cater specifically for cannabis. But right now, those are the challenges that we have with our current registration system in as much as medical cannabis is concerned.
Well, and I'll say real quickly to your question, just push for transparency in the process, because I understand your question. If they've granted a permit, does that mean you're going to get a license? If you're investing in your facilities in order to get a license because you must, are you going to be left high and dry because they're going to decide that we've already issued 100 licenses, you're out of luck? And that's one thing that the state does very well. I finally found one. Is that they're very transparent in the licensing process. So there are states that are closed markets, and as a part of their rules and regulations, they say we're going to have 2 manufacturers, processors, and 5 dispensaries. They have an open competition. Perhaps it's a lottery, however they decide to run it. Some states are open. The state of Oklahoma has just gone live, and they're just granting as many licenses as take, and then letting the market, close ones that compete. So, force the government to have some transparency and define those items so that you're not left in the dark and spending money on something that won't go anywhere.
Okay, we do have 2 more questions, but we are running out of time, so I'm just going to ask that we make the questions quick, and if one person can answer each of those, and then there will be time to chat to our speakers afterwards in the delegate lounge. I know that this topic is fully loaded and there's so many questions and answers. So to you.
Apologies for your message.
Can you just hold the mic closer?
Yes, the question is regarding Justice Sonnenfeld's decision. I believe he gave Parliament 2 years to enact. And I think we're 1 year into this. Do you have any idea where Parliament is in resolving this legislative anything?
Can I answer that? This afternoon, Myrtle, my partner, is meant to be sat here, but yesterday afternoon she was called to Parliament. And today she spoke to Parliament at 2 o'clock this afternoon about the movement going forward. And she's just reported back to me in Cape Town Airport that they really don't know what is happening right now. And if anybody's hedging their bets for it all going green on the 20th of April 2020, 20th of September 2020, don't hold your sights up. Things are going to shift, but it's going to take quite a long time to shift 100 years of prohibition. They are running around quite clueless at the moment, but there's people like Myrtle and Fields of Green with documents saying, here's what we're offering up to the table, have a look at this. And it was a big day for her today to go down there and see, and at least they're talking to us. But this whole thing about 2 years to do something, remember the Constitutional Court had an issue now where the Justice Department hadn't figured out the 2-year gap on traditional marriages, and they ordered the government to change it right now because the government wanted another year. So government's not doing anything about anything really that much, and we think they're going to need an extension, but maybe another thing will click in. All we have to do is stop the cops. Just get the cops out of the way and we can just move this thing forward a little bit more and entrench it even further in society.
Thank you. Last question.
Well, thank you. Mine is not a question actually. I just want to give thanks to people like you who are taking the efforts and challenging prison and try to and also showing that the leadership that we have, it's a bunch of stupid people. I must just thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a point, I'm the guy that just gets angry in the front and pushes the boundaries, but we can't do it without cerebral people like this keeping me in check and showing me how it is, because I'm just the loose cannon at the front of it all.
We try our best.
They try their best.
Can we give a round of applause for our speakers? Thank you so much to our audience for all the interaction, and thank you Hannah, Andrew and Julian for your time. And we will see you guys in 15 minutes at 5 o'clock. We have our last panel for the day, and then after that we have our last presentation for the day. So 5 o'clock we have medical cannabis, and 6 o'clock we have holistic cannabis. We hope you can join us, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
And just another thing, I'm speaking on the main stage in 10 minutes to give everyone an update of how it is at the moment on just about every aspect of the journey so far. So if you want to come and listen to the update of how we're doing it at Fields of Green, be welcome.